exercise. So in the and just running that for a couple hours a day for a month or whatever period. And kind of like a good example that I've come up over the years is getting a kind of like an elementary school or a grade school getting a bunch of children ready for a fire drill. So if you remember when you were younger and going through that, the fire alarm goes off and then everybody kind of freaks out and they don't know what to do. And then basically as you go through these rehearsals, you identify, okay, well, when the alarm goes off, we get single file, we go outside, and then we make sure everyone's safe and out of the building. And we make sure everything's right. And then once the firemen come, then it's safe to get back in. And that you got to kind of treat it like that. And effectively it is a fire in your organization. And doing these fire drills and doing these practices, doing tabletop exercises, and identifying, okay, what is the route that we're going to go, and taking that and putting it on the wall, putting it in the break room. In the event that there is a ransomware attack, unplug your computer, report it to security immediately, and then having the actual templates for how you're going to communicate that internally and externally, and having each of those different phases. And then the continuous aspect of this is making it better over time. So it basically, when I was a functional manager, one of the key things that I always tell my employees is improve every day. If you can have just those micro little actions, over a period of time, you'll actually start moving up the security maturity levels and going from a 1 to a 2, a 2 to a 3, so on and so forth, by looking at those different weak points. And where attack surface management comes in is it helps you identify those weak points, and then it helps you really prioritizing it and having an actual, like, turning it into an action plan. So you have your current state, and then collectively, you and your stakeholders that you have in your company, you have a desired state, and then in the middle is kind of that crawl, walk, run, and that project plan that gets you there. And that's what works the best. And I've worked with hundreds, maybe thousands of organizations over the years that, and this is the very simple approach that works really well. And you can't just throw a bunch of technology at it. It has to be a mix of people, process, and technology. There has to be governance around it. You have to have modernized technology to help, especially on the automation side, to make it continuous. And then actually having people have the skill set, and then being able to level up those organizations, those resources to be effective in their job and their role.
Yeah, that's a great point. Crawl, walk, run, and that's probably the only way to run.
Yeah, well, we're gonna get there.
Yeah, so let me bring up this more in the context of the small and medium-sized businesses. So for them, who doesn't have access to all these latest and greatest ASM and CART tools, etc., and may not have that number of people to run those. So what do you think? How should SMB approach when it comes to continuous security validation? Because today the attackers are targeting the SMB more or less in the same manner as anybody else, because on the internet for a ransomware guy is the same IP. Yep. So they just target every single IP address across the globe, right? So how do you think SMB should approach building a continuous security validation program?
Yeah, and my advice is same process, but think smarter, not harder. So, and really what it comes down to is it comes right back to the attack surface, but it's really being strict around, and being open and saying, do we really need this? So good aspect to it is, you talked about the attack surface getting into areas where now we have IoT and endpoints and more things that are interconnected with the cloud and more exposed. It's no longer just a network perimeter, especially in these smaller organizations. They have all these endpoints and all these different aspects, and having their environment be hardened, and then implementing network segmentation and breaking off those components. So like a good example, going back to the house analogy, if someone breaks into my house and I lock each individual door within my house, which is the equivalent of having segmentation, it actually, it kind of hardens the internal aspect once they actually break in. So the overall impact that exists is greatly reduced, and that's really the fundamentals around the attack surface management component. So if it, and I kind of, the advice I've given organizations is like, if it doesn't need to be in your environment, then don't have it be in your environment. So if you don't need organizations to access, to basically not have any kind of like URL filtering or having any kind of like blocked websites, like you shouldn't be able to go to whatever website that you want if you're working in a corporate environment on a corporate machine. And that's a very common mistake that organizations have. They don't have any policies around what people can access and can't access. And in some work environments, it's not appropriate and doesn't make sense from a security perspective to have access to social media, or being able to have users, typical regular users, have administrative access so they can download whatever programs that they want. And I can think of over 100 examples where that was commonplace, and organizations have come to me and asked me, is it a best practice to not have the end user have access to administrative rights? And it's like, well, yeah, absolutely, and that's an easy fix. It doesn't cost anything to do that. It's not a bona fide business need to have them have it, and it greatly reduces your security risk. And once you start adding in things like multi-factor authentication, stricter password rules, and then password resets, having the segmentation aspect where you're locking each individual door, and then basically constantly checking and going in and doing these monitoring aspects, and having these different exercises with red teams, and having more of the in-depth on specific use cases. So like this month, we're going to go in and just validate that we can respond to a phishing attack or a ransomware attack, or someone taking advantage of a vulnerability in our server architecture. And then and there's a lot of open source software out there too. There's pros and cons to that. But there are a lot of tools out there, and a lot of organizations are actually moving towards a product-led growth type approach, where they actually have a freemium level version of their product. So those are definitely things that they should absolutely take advantage of, where there's tons of tools out there that they can get exposure to and get access to, that they can have exposure to, especially if they're tight on budgets. The other thing too is to prioritize consolidated solutions. So with the advent of endpoint protection platforms and extended detection and response, or XDR, and a lot of the MDR, managed detection response, and managed services out there, I would certainly prioritize kind of an all-in-one type approach, where you can get, it's not necessarily the best of breed in all the different categories, but you can identify certain areas that are the most important to you, and being able to implement that, and kind of you get the biggest return on your investment. And then over time, then you can start weaving in best of breed solutions as you get more budget, you get more mature, and you kind of move up that security maturity levels.
Yeah. So Brad, you made a few great points, which I believe is very, very helpful for these small and medium-sized businesses. One point you mentioned was that you can start crawling with open source tools, right? Of course, yes. Open source tools has its pros and cons, but if you have somebody who got some bandwidth, that's a great way to start, right? So that's a great start for sure. And there are a lot of such open source tools out there. And another second very interesting strategy, which you mentioned, broad level strategy, is finding those solutions which has got multiple things together, rather than going for a single specialized thing. Look for Swiss Army knives kind of stuff, right? Yes, so which has got multiple things together. So those are some really, really great points. And let's move to the next part, which is you have seen all of these organizations which has matured over period of time, and you have seen across various breadth of the industry. So what had been some of the key things which you noticed as the common success factors as well as common mistakes? So some of the common success factors and failure factors when it comes to implementing continuous security validation.
Yeah, very good point. And I'll kind of preface this by saying the answer is unique to every single organization. So it heavily depends on the nature of the business, the culture, unfortunately budgets, and having that strategic alignment between the overall organization's financial goals and their security goals. And as part of that, ultimately you want to have you want to prevent attacks from happening in the first place. And there are metrics and key metrics that you can identify where you're able to reduce those attempts in the first place. So the equivalent of this would be like, let's just say at 2 o'clock in the morning, you hear someone knocking on your door, between the hours of 2 and 3 a.m. And although they're not getting in, that's the equivalent of reconnaissance, and they're basically trying to probe and identify areas that you're in, and those might be something as simple as firewall deny logs that might be of interest, and then so on and so forth. So anything you can do to identify those areas and eliminate them or reduce them is a key metric that you want to have. The other thing is, like, in the event that you actually have an incident, you want to reduce or that you have a breach or someone's in your organization. The number one thing is to detect them as soon as possible, and overall reducing what's called the dwell time and the amount of time that attacker is in your house effectively. And you want to basically investigate it as quickly as possible. You want to eradicate it as quickly as possible, and you want to address what the core entry point was in the first place, and then basically patch it up, fix it so it doesn't happen again. And those are key fundamentals that are there. And that's where the biggest challenge is like organizations just don't have they don't have the visibility that they require to get to those points. Those are certainly very key. The other kind of key point that organizations will get into is a lot of the monitoring and doing these different assessments is ultimately they're trying to find a needle in a haystack is a common analogy that's used. And unfortunately, what organizations will do, especially early on, is they'll add more and more hay with the idea that they will have better visibility. And unfortunately, that actually makes things more difficult because it's more difficult to actually find the needle. So as a key metric and focus and priority area, it's definitely best practice to eliminate the noise and eliminate all that excess hay, so you can find these needles faster and quicker, and eventually get to the point where you're actually able to categorize the individual needles, so you can actually identify a needle within a stack of needles that's relevant to the specific use case that you have. Because what will happen with advanced persistent threats is they'll actually come back time and time again. And unfortunately, one of the key things that ends up happening is, especially with ransomware attacks, is organizations they'll actually recover and implement a backup, or basically get to a steady state, but they won't address the main entry point that the attackers use to get in. So all they do is they come right back in, and that's why paying for ransomware doesn't really work, because a lot of times organizations don't address the core entry point. And once kind of the word gets out, then it's open season. So you might have multiple different criminal organizations looking to get into your environment. And there's metrics that you can build around all of those things, like reducing false positives, reducing false negatives, and then and overall measuring it is